Story 1. My husband and I are in our late 30s and choose not to have children. Some people on a forum for those without children suggested I should post here too, so enjoy the saga. My husband and I had been saving up for almost a decade to move to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we bit the bullet and moved to our dream location. Housing here is super expensive like Hawaii prices, so all we could afford was half of a duplex. It is beautiful and on the water with places for our boat. Unfortunately, Karen, Billy Bob the boyfriend, and her 3 mischievous children live in the other unit. Setup. There was a period when we just visited for a week here and there, but we live here full-time now. The entire duplex was owned by an older gentleman who rented out both sides. The sides do not match at all. One side is a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. The other side of the duplex is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We bought the 5-bedroom. On our side of the property, we have 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and dockage about 150 since it is on a corner. The other side has a small backyard, patio, and maybe 15 of dockage. The rental leases say the renters are entitled to their specific backyards, but there were no fences or anything, so all the renters shared the entire backyard. After we bought the house, Karen immediately tried to throw her weight around, saying they expected to continue with that privilege. I told her if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her. She thought this meant she could use our backyard whenever she wanted. Party incident. One day, my husband and I were enjoying some drinks outside when a delivery truck showed up to set up a giant inflatable in our backyard. I asked Karen what she thought she was doing, and she said it was her kid's birthday. Then she had the gall to say it was a family and friends only event, so we had to stay inside our house, not wanting to be a total troublemaker and ruin some little girl's birthday. I told Karen that after this, she would have no access to our backyard, period. Karen shrugged and kept setting up for the party. During the party, an intoxicated adult wandered into our house, which shocked us all. I said Karen's house is on the other side, and he said, "Oh." Karen said she owned the whole property and to use whichever bathroom was available. I directed him to Karen's bathroom, and soon after, she came storming into our house, screaming about how dare we make her look bad to her friends and how selfish we are that we couldn't even spare one bathroom. She said we didn't deserve all this space with just us. I told Karen to get out of my house, or I would be calling the authorities. She finally left, and the party wrapped up shortly after. Backyard remodel. After the party incident, we decided we needed to clearly define the backyard and build a fence. While we were spending the money, we decided to update the patio, put in a fire pit, and an outdoor kitchen. While the contractor was on site, nosy Karen had to come investigate. Since the fence would be the last thing built, I was vague and just stuck to telling her about the patio update. You could see her face light up because, of course, in her mind, what's ours is hers. When the workers started on the fence, Karen came out screaming for the work to stop. I went outside and told the workers to keep working and told Karen to mind her own business. Of course, in true Karen fashion, she called the authorities. What happened next was hilarity on my part after explaining to the officer that we were building a fence on our property and the landlord, of which Karen was not, knew about it. When the officer gave Karen a stern lecture, I thought her head was going to explode. She went back into her house and slammed the sliding door so hard it sounded like something cracked. We got our fence, and I thought that would be the end, but of course not. The boat incident. One day, Billy Bob entered the picture, and he was as much a terrible neighbor as Karen. He would throw cigarette butts and empty beverage cans over our fence for disrespecting his woman. I didn't know Paradise had unruly residents, but Billy Bob is the epitome of the stereotype. Billy Bob has a boat. A 30 fishing boat to be precise. Of course, that side of the duplex only has 15 of dockage. Since we have so much dockage and only one boat, we rent out the other dockage spots on a month-to-month basis. People come and go, so if we don't receive rent from them by the end of the month and the boat disappears, we think nothing of it. We had a renter who tied up their boat on the property line, but Billy Bob wanted to park his boat and needed that space. Karen and Billy Bob posed as us we were out of town, told the renters to be gone at the end of the month, and then parked Billy Bob's boat on the dockage. I only found out about it weeks later because the renter left a negative review on the rental site we use. They said we were rude and went back on the verbal agreement to let them stay for 3 more months. I was like, what is all this? After a phone call, I quickly put two and two together. I called the authorities, who told Karen and Billy Bob they needed to move their boat, or it would be towed, the equivalent of it anyway. Karen and Billy Bob started screaming the boat is fully on their property, it isn't. Then changed to no one can own the water, true. But a seawall is deeded, that we are liars. And at some point, Billy Bob struck an officer and went to jail. I felt bad for the officers, so I took them all snacks the next day with a note apologizing for neighbor drama. I ended up winning my small claims suit against them for lost rental income, but of course, haven't seen a penny. I eventually convinced the dockage renters to come back and gave them a few months free as compensation. Final revenge. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Get ready for some satisfying justice. So with the collapsing market, we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings when a perfect opportunity opened up. The landlord who owned both properties was in desperate need of some cash and was tired of managing the property from 2,000 miles away. Because, of course, Karen is a Karen and called him weekly for every little thing. His only stipulation was we let the poor single mom who has been his renter for 8 years finish her lease, which is up in July. Since we just have money, we were trying to reinvest, and because now we get to control our neighbors, we jumped on that. Since we didn't need a realtor or mortgage, and an inspection had been done just a year ago for the old landlord to refinance, everything closed in just under 2 weeks. Karen was aware of a change of ownership. We registered the property under a limited liability company, but didn't know who until 8 days ago. I went over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. Karen answered with a, "What do you want, you annoying person?" I smiled, handed her our landlord information, and sweetly reminded her rent was due by Friday, but she could just hand me the check if that was easier. I've always heard descriptions of people's faces turning white, but this was the first time I have actually seen it. I told Karen that we are honoring her lease until the end of July, but afterwards, she had better make plans to move because we intend to remodel before these next tenants move in. Goodbye, Karen. Edit. A lot of people misunderstood the beginning. Let's call our side of the duplex Duplex OP. The other duplex is Duplex Karen. We purchased Duplex Up. After we bought it, Duplex OP was no longer a rental. Both Duplex OP and Duplex Karen were for sale independently, but we only had the money to buy Duplex OP. Duplex Karen is still a rental because it has never sold. Now we own both Duplex OP and Duplex Karen. Duplex Karen is still a rental. Duplex OP is still not a rental. When we made property improvements to Duplex OP, it was ours and not a rental. Update 1. Not much to update, folks. Karen and the family's lease isn't up until the end of July. Rent has been paid on time. As far as I know, she doesn't have a new place lined up. We've served her 30-day notice, and we will not be renewing the lease. We also offered in writing that we will prorate July and waive the termination fee if they want to leave before the end of the lease. Beyond the near-weekly loud parties and having to call the authorities because the kids were throwing lit fireworks at our boat, not much beyond the norm. Update the 2nd of August 2020. Long story short, Karen and family are still in the place and not paying any rent. They were served with eviction, but due to health crisis-related regulations, we can't actually do anything about it. At least Karen and Billy Bob had a huge fight which ended up in him being arrested, and he hasn't returned. I've been told by our lawyer, once some laws are changed or removed in September, we can have the authorities escort them off the property that day since we've already filed the eviction. It's just a difficult situation right now. Karen is being extra smug. She tried to push her bounds and kept coming over to our property. A talk with the authorities set her straight, but she's playing music loud and just tossing her trash everywhere. We really wanted to move our elderly parents in after a quick remodel because Dad needs shoulder surgery badly and Mom now needs a walker. They need more care, and it's getting harder driving 2 hours a day to do that. Our parents want their own space though and won't live on our side with us. My husband and I are trying not to be angry and make things worse with Karen, but we are both exhausted. Things just aren't great. Story 2. Quick note, I was part of this story, but not the dealer nor receiver of the revenge. Years ago, I used to work with a receptionist in a veterinary clinic named Margaret. Marga was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at this practice since it was opened some 40 years ago. She always had a smile, a joke, compliments, and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I had ever worked with, and she basically knew everyone, from our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margaret, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the most unpleasant, nastiest families I had ever met that had two even nastier pit bulls. I'm talking nastier than refuse that had been hoarded by dung beetles for years nasty. And these dogs were constantly escaping and terrorizing the neighborhood, even trying to get into her house. Margot had asked them more than once to please keep the dogs contained, especially since she had an elderly, fat cat named Smokestack, and these pit bulls had attacked smaller animals before. The family basically told her to go away, that they knew what they were doing. How dare she accuse the breed, and so on, basically blowing her off. Margaret knew there had been reports filed against her neighbors, but nothing had ever been done about it really. So she made sure to keep Smokestack in the house to keep him safe, and was very careful not to let him out. If you had been paying attention up until this point, you'll notice I'm using the words was and had regarding old Smokestack, and it was as awful as you think. 3 weeks before Christmas, Marga had the day off and was in the garage with Smokestack fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pit bulls next door got out and broke through the bottom of her garage door. They went right for Smokestack before she could blink and started to tear the cat apart. Margaret screamed for help, and it was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Smokestack from the jaws of these dogs. I was working this day and will never forget when she came in, crying harder than I had ever seen anyone cry in my life, clutching poor dying Smokestack in her arms. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to bring Smokestack back, but we couldn't do it. It would have taken a miracle of God, and then some, and he passed away a truly terrible way to go in what should have been the golden years of his fat cat life. Margaret sat there for a while with his mangled body, quietly crying for a while before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She told us all, "I've got a job to do, take care of him, girls," and then left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with family and then continue on with life as normal. We figured wrong. Now when I say Margaret knew everyone, I mean everyone. Right after she left the hospital, Margaret gathered herself up and went to the authorities with pictures of poor Smokestack and told her story. The same officers she had watched grow up over the last 20 years from rowdy middle schoolers she used to help babysit to the officers they were today. They were absolutely shocked to hear what had happened to their surrogate grandma and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margaret's daughter. The judge granted an emergency, dangerous animal extraction warrant to her neighbors. Of course, there was a hearing. Within 2 weeks, which I got to admit, was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs weren't aggressive. They even went so far as to accuse Margaret of having it out for their family and making it all up. But their argument trickled when the dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented and finally completely dried out when Margaret presented the surveillance video her grandson had gotten showing the dogs coming into her property and attacking poor Smokestack. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of her neighbor's dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margaret heard a knock on her door. She opened it up to see the neighbors standing there, sobbing uncontrollably. They were begging her to stop animal control, that they had these dogs since they were puppies, how the kids would be devastated and it would ruin Christmas, and if she could find it in her heart to give the dogs another chance. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved abominably. They didn't offer to fix the garage. They never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. They didn't even pay for Smokestack to be cremated. At no point had they even shown the slightest shred of remorse for what damage their dogs had done. And as the neighbors stood there, blubbering and whimpering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas, Margaret looked them straight in the eye and told them, in her calmest voice, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours," and shut the door in their face just as animal control pulled up onto the driveway. Margaret was not surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into the truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve, a perk from having known the animal control officer's supervisor for years. Marga even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into their family, as the father proceeded to drive while intoxicated into a telephone pole that same night, killing him instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so Child Protective Services picked up the kids by February, and ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Smokestack's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown at least some regret, Marga might not have gone as far as she did. She was and is still the person to forgive and forget. Or maybe she ultimately knew it had to be done, to push it to this point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thank you, Margaret, for making the world a little bit safer for the pets in the world, and rest in peace, Smokestack. Hopefully, I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna.